Welcome back to the lab. Saturday afternoon, a little while since the video. Some of you will be wanting an update. So a little bit on the March, a little bit on the 300 ZX above us here. The mighty Z32 300 ZX twin turbo. Actually very close to being able to start it. Not right now. If we really had to, you could probably make this run today. It's only 3:30. There's a bit of day left. We could most likely make it happen unless we ran into some hurdles. What has happened is we've got an oil filter on there. There's some sirens going in the background again. Oil in the sump. We hooked up a battery onto the starter motor with a clever little doofer to hotwire it, and we cranked it over to get some oil pressure. And we failed. Didn't get any oil pressure. Round and round and round it went. No oil pressure. Bit annoying. I had pre-primed the filter. It's a brand new pump with factory lube in there and everything's good. It should have worked. So I did an old trick that most people will probably frown upon, but put 24 volts onto the starter motor and spun it over faster. That'll give us some oil pressure. Nope, no oil pressure. This is without spark plugs in, so there's no real load on the starter motor and not going to do any harm. I knew there was no oil pressure because I had a pressure sensor removed from here. I was waiting for oil to come out of there to know that we definitely had flow. So, after a few attempts at that and getting nowhere, the next best attempt is to, well, obviously you check you have got actual oil in the sump, enough oil in the sump. That's the first thing you do. And that was fine. So I took the oil filter off so that there's no resistance in the circuit from sump through the pump and out of the pump. Because what's happening is there was enough oil in here and it was thick enough, excuse the aeroplane, let's keep going anyway, it was thick enough that the pump couldn't draw a vacuum to pull the oil from the sump through to itself and through the pump and through this. So as soon as I took that off, so there was no resistance on this side of it, we had oil pressure straight away. It just poured out here with the filter back on, good as gold. And normally if you just, most people would have just assembled it and just would have cranked it over and started it, and that would have run the pump at enough speed that it would have cleared it straight away. You would have had oil pressure straight away. I was just trying to make sure everything was right. So did it the hard way, I guess. So once that was back on and cranked it over and there was oil coming out of, it's a bit dark up there, isn't there? There's a couple of sensors here and a feed for a turbo. Took that one off once there was oil coming from there, put that back on, so that would pressurize the whole system when we should prime up all our bearings and followers and all that sort of carry on. And guess what? We had an oil leak, of course. One bolt. Right on top of that there, turbo charger there, the hardest one of the whole car to get to. A banjo bolt with an exhaust stud and nut right on top of it, so there's barely any room between the top of the bolt and the stud that sits on top of it. So, as is typical with 300 ZXs, excuse the messy bench here, we had to make a custom spanner. Look at that, pretty special, isn't it? That's about how much room there was to get between the top of the banjo bolt and the bottom of the stud that's directly on top of it. Just because of where everything's ended up on this particular engine. So, custom spanner, done. Let's hope I don't have to visit that once it's up and running, because that could get quite difficult. Air conditioning system is now, it's a full system, not necessarily 100% sealed, as you can see. That fitting's loose, but it is a complete system now. If we tightened everything up, leak tested it, you actually vacuum test it and see if it pulls any air into it. Put the oil in there for the compressor, it's a different type of oil, etc, etc. It should go in theory, but we'll find out. So that's done. Fuel system's all complete. I'm not going to lower the car down to show you. Up there's some fuel hoses that are done, 100%. They're on. Fuel system's sealed. Everything's tight. If I put power on the pump, we should have fuel run through and we'll be able to leak test that. I'm going to leave that till later on in case I have to take the hoses off for some reason. It's better they're dry rather than full of fuel. As you can see, the exhaust system's on. Of course, that just bolted up 5 minutes with no problems at all. Yeah, right. Being a 300ZX with some aftermarket parts on there and some custom-made parts, the aftermarket exhaust manifolds, a lot of room for movement with the turbine housing backwards and forwards and left and right and up and down on both sides, and that dictates where these downpipes end up. Because they're the American style downpipes with the flanges on quite an odd angle. The factory Japanese ones are basically horizontal. Makes it easier to get an exhaust system that'll just fit. Whereas with these ones on this angle here, any slight changes here, this way or this way, massive changes way down at the back of the car there. You can put a different thickness gasket on one side compared to the other. There are no gaskets on this one, by the way. And it'll shift things 5 or 10 millimeters down at the other end because it's such a length of pipe. It's just the way it is. I designed these ones just to run with high temp silicon on them rather than gaskets, by the way, just as an aside. So anyway, this has involved chopping and changing. That's actually a new flange. It was just easier to chop the old one off here, put a new piece of pipe and a new flange and stick that on and get that in the right place. And that's given us enough clearance here, which the previous assembly that was basically hitting the floor there because of stuff and things. Aftermarket engine mount. The engine mount's not sitting down up in here. Are we going to be able to see it? Probably not, unless I get a camera. There's a little study type thing that hangs down into the slot, and that aligns the engine mount and stops it turning when you're trying to tighten up the nut there on that stud. And they had the engine sitting on top of those little locating studs instead of down in the slot. So the whole engine was out by 5 millimeters or so compared to where it should have been. I don't like the sound of that. I think we just stumbled across. There's something very bad happening inside there. I need to take that off and have a look. That sounds like a loose bush or something. Not a lot of clearance here between transmission and cross member and the exhaust. No transmission mount bracket, I guess you would call it, on the exhaust at this point. I probably will put one on and I will pull these down a little bit to give them a little bit more clearance. They don't hit. They can move quite a long way. That's just the loose bolts at the front there that are rattling when I do that. But they're not hitting. They shouldn't hit. They probably won't, but just because it's going to be purely a road car now, not so much a race car / toy, we'll get that sorted out so she doesn't hear all those funny noises banging and clanging. When this came in originally, when I went to take it apart, I don't know how it happened. You could see the original mounts they'd left a mark on these things a bit like that, right? So it's a lot shinier there where it's been sitting there. And same on that side. They were both, when I built the exhaust, they were both nicely centralized like that and everything was right. When it came in here, this mount rubber was sitting way over here. This was easily 20 mils too far towards the diff. I'm not sure how that happened with that one still staying in the same spot. I'm assuming it's something to do with changes with the engine coming apart and going back together and everything that's gone on there. They've increased the distance of the front here or something like that, which then pivots at this point here and pulls this side here in somehow. So again, more chopping and changing to make that work properly. Cut through here, put a weld on here, that's pulled that out the 20 mils or whatever it is that it needed to be, so that that now lines up properly as it was originally. This exhaust here, through here, that's fine, it was fine. These mounts here, for some reason, were far too short, 10 mils too short. So the end of the mounts, sorry about the light coming through here, the end of the mounts, that's much better for you, isn't it? No, it's just as bad, the light on the other side, was actually inside that rubber mount there, and it was all to the point where it was nearly going to fall off, so pass. Maybe that was something I had got wrong earlier on and hadn't bothered with, but that's been shifted now. That's now good. Other side here, that side was all good. This section through here, because we'd shifted everything down here and all the way through here, this was all completely wrong. So that had to be cut off and redone. And we now have something that is, trying not to hit the march as I squat down so you can see it, is as symmetrical as you'll get on a 300ZX. They are not actually symmetrical, despite what you would think. The diff and everything's actually a little bit off center. Obviously you've got a pinion and a crown wheel inside there, so everything's off to one side, which gives optical illusion, screws everything up. But the exhaust system itself at the front here is completely different on that side to what it is on that side, normally because of where the starter motor is and the shape of the floor and all that sort of carry on. Once you're past the resonators there, it should be more or less the same, give or take, and this one wasn't for some reason, but it is now. So that's that. Let's have a look at the march. There's the march. Thanks for watching. Cheers, bye. No. So I have been fiddling with this as always. There's a few things that go on. Is mostly weight reduction at the moment. This is a big focus. There has been a little bit of weight reduction gone on at the back end here. There's a factory panel that used to run along here. It's now on the floor. I've chopped that out. It didn't need to be there. It was basically so the plastic trim could clip in there. I think I had thoughts of putting that back in there at some point in time, but we're well beyond doing that now. You don't really want plastic trim inside an engine bay anyway if you can avoid it on a race car. So that was the piece that ran from there to there, just covered up all that stuff there, 700 grams. So that's quite good, nearly a kg. It's more than a can of Coke. A couple of cans of Coke actually I can have before I go racing. So that's quite good. In there, the thing with the holes on it, that's new. There's one of those on each side, just to tie the cage in to the B-pillars. The B-pillars have actually got a reasonable amount of structure hiding in behind there, believe it or not. There's still some structure left in this car, the original stuff. So we've got an attach point here, we've got an attach point at the bottom of the cage. Then there was really nothing all the way through on the main hoop, all the way through to the door bars, basically, the bit that's triangulated from here. I'm not sure if you can see that through the screen, down to the floor down there. And then the next point of contact was up here onto the windscreen. A pillar, I should call it. Now, if I get that in the right spot, you'll see that's got a crack. The windscreen's cracked through here. That cracked a long time ago. I'm not concerned about it. It's not a problem at all. Happens to be right on the edge of the gusset, the webbing. So that to me indicates that the chassis and the roll cage are kind of moving independent to each other to a certain extent, enough that it's cracked the windscreen. So that's why I've tried to tie this in here a little bit to try and stiffen things up somewhat. I have been thinking about redoing the door bars to a more traditional style of door bar to give it a bit more torsional rigidity is the words. So we may do something there. Other than that, I showed you everything else that I've done inside here, shifting buttons around, putting a real piece of carbon fibre in the dash instead of a piece of aluminium with fake carbon fibre and all that. Nothing else has happened really. That's it. I'll put some, close that. I'll put some holes in the front end. I didn't like it. I showed you on Facebook. Oh, I didn't like that. So what I've done is I've put a piece of satin black vinyl over the top of it to look at it and go, do I like that or not? I reckon that'll do. Reasonably happy with that. The other thing I've done is had to go at these rear guards. This is actually a new guard. There's the old one there. Wasn't a heck of a lot wrong with this one. This is the one that I squished up against the wall and skid pan. If you get it in the right spot, you can kind of see the wrinkles in the top surface there. Not too much evidence left underneath here. There's a few dents that you can see. However, the shape of it overall, excluding the squishing that happened on the skid pan, wasn't quite right. This edge here, when I shrunk this side to get the curve going on, it's left this corner a little bit higher than what it should have been. Scrap aluminium pile. Anyone wants a guard for one of these, it'll bolt straight onto your stock. So this edge here ended up being on an angle like that. That's to the extreme right. So it was about 5 mils higher up here than what it should have been, really, compared to that, which I didn't like. It never sat right, didn't look right to me. So that's a new one, and I've shrunk that entire edge all the way around there, plus that side, to pull this in like that to get that to flatten out, so that now it actually looks square. It looks like it's in the right angles. Of course, that's poking out on the outside edge like that. That's quite deliberate. I want it to be like that, so that bit's fine. And then that helps make sure this edge here sits nice and level while having that nice and square. The other thing that I did while I was at it is took off the bracket that's underneath here. That's only pop riveted on there, many pop rivets, and lowered the whole guard down about 10 to 15 millimeters as far as I can go before we run out of wheel arch. If I come down any further, we have to fill in the gap at the top here, which is quite difficult, so I won't be doing that. But it's just a subtle change, just a little bit less clearance between the tyres and the guards on both sides. Just tidies it up a little bit. There is a lot more to do. I'm going to redo all the vinyl wrap. It's starting to get very shabby. You can see some of the original mounting holes there. This was all covered up because this was a bit higher up. So after 5 years, this is starting to look pretty rough. So we'll get that tidied up very shortly. It looks all right, doesn't it? It looks a little bit Subaru-ish. I think some of the Subarus have got a little thing like that in the middle of it. That'll do. I'll chop that out at some point. I'll mark it out a bit straighter than that. We'll chop that out, and that'll be that sorted out. I think I've got enough carbon fibre cloth to do that vent from carbon fibre instead of aluminium. It's about 3 weeks, I think, until our final round of New Zealand Super Lap Series, so that's probably about all we're going to get up to, and we'll see how it goes. Thanks for watching. Cheers, boy.